this was not just an affair. This was a carefully planned crime. After Clara inherited a massive fortune from her uncle, her husband suddenly appeared with fake death certificates, forged documents, and a young woman he claimed had a right to the estate. He thought an injured wife in a hospital bed would be too weak to stop him. But Clara's lawyer had already started digging. The hospital room was secretly recording, and every lie he told brought him closer to prison. What began as betrayal quickly became fraud, bigamy, and possibly something even darker.
The only thing I could hear was the steady pulse of the machines that were keeping me breathing. My name's Amelia, I'm 36, and I had just inherited $20 million from an uncle I barely knew. I tried to move, and a white-hot flash of pain reminded me about the crash. That's when I saw the TV in the corner. It was my husband, Ethan, but he wasn't alone. He had his arm around a woman the news called his new wife. I expected betrayal, but I didn't expect to see it on the evening news. It's crazy how fast a life can just detonate. Just last week, I was driving home, thrilled to tell Ethan my uncle had left me his entire $20 million fortune, a Boston brownstone, and a future we had only dreamed about. But instead of happiness, I found a betrayal that felt worse than any physical injury. I'm Amelia, and I was never meant to inherit $20 million from my Uncle Richard. Our family story was complicated. He was my father's brother, but a bitter argument over a real estate deal had ripped them apart years ago. The anger was so intense, we'd barely make eye contact at Christmas. Still, I held on to memories of visiting his incredible skyscraper projects as a kid. Those weekends felt like stepping into the future. Uncle Richard would let me look at the blueprints and tell me grand stories about building a city from the ground up. Uncle Richard was a self-made real estate mogul who'd built an empire during the Boston boom. He was a legend in business, but his private life was a mystery. He never married and had no kids, preferring to pour all his time and passion into his work. What I never knew was that he'd been secretly following my career all these years. "You've got my ambition," he told me once when I was about 13. "You're clever, you're tenacious, and you never back down." After I finished grad school, Uncle Richard started sending postcards, just a note on my birthday or for the holidays. I always wrote back, but kept it brief, unsure how to fix the family feud. His postcards were just simple notes, his thoughts on the market, and he would sometimes ask about my work in architectural history. I never saw he was carefully trying to rebuild a bridge with the niece he hardly knew. About 6 months before the accident, I heard from my cousin that Uncle Richard was terminally ill. I knew I had to go see him. I was shocked to see how thin he looked in that hospital bed, a shell of the powerful man I remembered. But his eyes were still sharp when I came in. "Amelia," he rasped, his voice thin. "I knew you would eventually find your way back." That single visit turned into weekly phone calls. We talked for hours, desperately trying to catch up. He never brought up the fight with my father, not even once, and I never asked. It was like we had a silent agreement to start over. "Life is way too short to hold on to old anger," he said in one of our final conversations, a lesson I was about to learn the hard way. He passed away in his sleep 3 months after that. I was surprised by how deeply I grieved for him. As for Ethan, our story started 9 years ago in a smoky little jazz club. I was there reviewing the venue for a history journal I wrote for. Ethan was a musician, and his complex, soulful compositions were all anyone could talk about. He had this incredible intensity, a real spark when he talked about his music. "Music is about pulling harmony out of a world of noise," he told me that first night. We started seeing each soon after and were married at City Hall within a year. A big wedding wasn't in our budget, but it felt right. Ethan was desperate to make it as a composer, and I believed in his dream with everything I had. I took a steady job as a historical consultant to cover our rent while he looked for gigs and record deals. For the first few years, even with no money, we were happier than I'd ever been. We had a tiny apartment and watched every penny, dreaming of something bigger. He'd compose all night while I researched old buildings. We were a true team, each of us doing our part. But the last few years were incredibly hard. Ethan's music career hit a wall, and the endless rejections started to change him. He became quiet and withdrawn, often just vanishing for hours at a time. If I asked where he went, he'd snap that he needed artistic solitude or was meeting contacts. Our savings account was always drained because he'd spend our money on expensive instruments or studio time that led to nothing. "You just don't get what it takes to create," was his go-to excuse. I was at my office when I got the call from James Caldwell, my uncle's lawyer. "Amelia Vance? This is James Caldwell. I'm the executor of Richard Vance's estate. Could you come to my office this afternoon?" I said yes, assuming it was about a small memento or something similar. When James pushed the will across his polished desk, I nearly fell off my chair. Uncle Richard had left it all to me. The entire fortune, $20 million, plus the brownstone on Beacon Hill. He amended his will after you two started talking again, James explained.
He was so impressed with the person you became.
Inside the folder was a handwritten note. It started, "Dear Amelia, if you're holding this, then my time is up. I've watched you from afar and always admired your resilience and your good heart. You have the fire I once had, but you have more compassion. This fortune is a resource, not a solution. Use it to build a good life, be happy, and never forget that true value isn't about money. With love, your Uncle Richard." I signed all the legal documents in a daze, $20 million. It was a staggering sum of money. We could finally be free of debt. Ethan could build his dream recording studio. We could buy a home, see the world, maybe even start our family. The sheer number of possibilities was overwhelming. On the way home, I stopped at a vintage guitar shop and bought a rare guitar for Ethan, a gift to mark our new beginning. I knew I had to tell him face to face. News this life-changing deserved a real moment. I did call him, though, just to say I was heading home early with something incredible to share. He sounded distracted, almost annoyed. "I'm right in the middle of something, Amelia. A new composition. It's really complicated. This is huge, Ethan. I'll be there in 30 minutes. All right, just don't interrupt my flow. I'm in the zone." I ended the call, my excitement dimming a bit, but I was still beaming. I figured his mood would shift once he heard. I had no idea that would be the last regular conversation we would ever have. As I got on the freeway, a sudden downpour started, making the asphalt slick. I remember turning up the radio and planning exactly how I would tell Ethan the news. Maybe I would have him close his eyes while I put the vintage guitar in his hands, right before I told him everything. I could see his face in my mind, all the tension from the last few years just vanishing when he heard our financial struggles were finished. I was so caught up in that daydream, I almost didn't notice the trouble ahead. A massive truck in the next lane began to hydroplane, losing control on the wet road. It all seemed to happen in slow motion as it slid, the trailer swinging right towards my car like a giant steel fist. I cranked the steering wheel hard, but it was useless. The crash was deafening, a horrible shriek of metal as my car was sent into a sickening spin. The airbag punched me in the face with incredible force. In the middle of the chaos, I saw the guitar case fly across the passenger seat, the expensive gift tumbling through the air. My very last thought was about a billboard for a divorce attorney, with the smug slogan, "Start your next chapter." And then it all went dark. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and that sterile, antiseptic smell that only exists in hospitals. My entire body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. Every single breath was a new wave of agony. I tried to shift and immediately wished I hadn't. "Take it easy," a gentle voice said. "You need to rest." My vision was too blurry to focus on the woman in the light blue scrubs standing by my bed. Her name tag read Maria. What happened?" I managed to ask. "You were in a serious car accident on the interstate," Maria told me, adjusting one of the IV lines. "You've been unconscious for nearly 2 full days." 2 days? The words hit me like a physical blow. "My husband. Does Ethan know that I'm here?" Maria's expression tightened for just a moment. "We called the emergency contact in your wallet and left a few messages, but he hasn't shown up yet." Even through the fog of the painkillers, I felt a cold spike of fear. "Not yet, but I'm certain he'll get here soon," she added, though her tone wasn't very reassuring. Later that afternoon, Dr. Miller came in to run down my list of injuries. 3 fractured ribs, a severe concussion, and a shattered femur that was now held together with metal rods. "You are extremely fortunate," he said. "The driver of the truck that struck your vehicle did not survive." Fortunate? Lying in that bed, unable to even reach my own husband, I did not feel fortunate at all. I kept calling Ethan's number, but it just went straight to his voicemail every single time. I sent him a string of text messages that were marked as delivered, but I never got a single reply. With each passing hour of silence, my anxiety began to spiral. My nurse, Maria, was the only person I had to talk to. She would come to check on me even when she wasn't on shift, bringing me a magazine or just sitting with me for a bit. "Anything yet?" she asked on the 3rd day as she adjusted my pillows. I could only shake my head, a sharp pain radiating up my spine. I just didn't get it. Even if his phone died, he'd have to know I was missing when I never made it home. On the 4th day, a text from Ethan finally appeared. Swamped with this new composition, it said, "I'll try to get over there when things ease up." Not a single question about how I was. No asking if I needed anything. Just that. "That doesn't seem right," Maria said, looking at my screen. "Is there a friend you can call to go check on him?" I called my best friend, Claire, but she sounded evasive and strange on the phone, making up weird excuses for why she couldn't get to the hospital. When I asked my nurse about Liam, she just get this tight look on her face. A week on hospital bed rest, and my instincts were screaming. On the hospital tablet, I logged into our joint account and my heart just stopped. It was a blog post from some Miami Society page, congratulating Liam on a massive private equity deal. He was in the picture at a rooftop party with his arm wrapped around another woman. My hand trembled as I dialed his number. He answered, his voice tight over the sound of loud music. Liam, I'm at the hospital. I've been here a week. Where have you been? A beat of silence. Look, Ava, I'm closing the deal of a lifetime right now, bigger than your pregnant wife being in a hospital bed. Another pause, one that felt like it stretched for miles. When he finally spoke, his voice was pure ice. I don't have time for this drama, Ava. Some of us are actually building an empire. Then the line went dead. I just stared at the blank screen, my eyes burning with tears. Drama? I had a $7 million trust fund from my grandfather maturing in a month. I was his wife, carrying his child, and I was completely alone. An hour later, my nurse Maria found me in hysterics and had to call for a sedative. As I drifted off, one thought kept circling. Something was horribly, fundamentally wrong. The days after Liam's cruel call were the bleakest I've ever lived through. I couldn't keep food down. I barely got any sleep. I just cried until my face was a swollen mess. The fear for my baby was nothing compared to the agony of this betrayal. 8 years together, and he ends it like this? With a phone call from a man I didn't even recognize. Maria got so concerned she brought in Dr. Evans, the hospital's psychologist. She was a sharp woman with kind eyes and zero patience for nonsense. She didn't offer me any useless sympathies. You're dealing with multiple traumas, she explained calmly. The high-risk pregnancy, the shock of his betrayal, and the terror of being abandoned. It's perfectly normal to feel like your entire world is collapsing. Did he know? I whispered, my voice hoarse. About my grandfather's trust fund, I mean. What trust fund? Dr. Evans asked, her tone gentle. I hadn't mentioned the money to anyone here. It felt trivial next to everything else, but now I had to wonder if it was the reason for Liam's sudden cruelty. I have a $7 million trust maturing next month, I told her. I was going to surprise him with the news. Dr. Evans' eyebrows shot straight up. Well, that certainly adds a new layer to the situation. 2 days later, my best friend Chloe finally showed up, clutching a sad-looking bouquet of lilies and refusing to meet my eyes. You look awful, she blurted out, then flinched. Oh my God, Ava, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean… Why have you been ghosting me, Chloe? I asked, too drained to pretend to be polite. She collapsed into the visitor's chair, the flowers completely forgotten on her lap. I just didn't know what to say, Ava. The whole thing is just so messed up. Just tell me, what is going on with Liam? She started worrying a loose thread on her sweater. He's with someone else, a woman named Isabella. The words felt like a physical blow. What do you mean? With someone else? We're married. He's been telling everyone that you left him, she whispered, her own tears starting to fall. He said the pregnancy was too much and you had a breakdown. He threw a moving-on party at the house last week. I couldn't bring myself to go. The sterile hospital room started to tilt. He told people I'd abandoned him while I was lying in this bed, terrified for our baby. Chloe just nodded, her face crumbling. I only knew you were still here because Maria called me. Ava, he blocked your number. He even had the locks on the front door changed. Show me, I demanded, my voice cracking. Show me this woman. Reluctantly, Chloe took out her phone and opened up her Instagram, and there he was, my husband. His arm was around a sleek, dark-haired woman on a yacht. They were toasting with champagne, looking like Miami's new golden couple. There was something about her face that was uncomfortably familiar. She looked younger than me, maybe in her late 20s, in a ridiculously expensive dress, with features that were an uncanny echo of my own. Her name is Isabella Ricci, Chloe said. She's an art consultant. People are saying they met about 4 months ago. 4 months! While I was dealing with the worst of my morning sickness, Liam was starting a new life with her. I felt a wave of nausea. There's more, Chloe added, her voice dropping. The gossip is they got engaged last weekend. He gave her a massive ring. Engaged. My husband told everyone I'd lost my mind, then got engaged to another woman. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it all just took my breath away. Maria, who'd been checking my vitals, saw the heart monitor start to spike and rushed over. All right, that's enough for one day, she said, gently but firmly steering a devastated Chloe towards the door. I'm so sorry, Ava, Chloe called over her shoulder. I should have told you everything sooner. After she was gone, Maria just sat with me, her silent presence a small anchor in the storm. You need a lawyer, she said finally. This isn't just a cheating husband, Ava, this is fraud. She was right. With her help, I called my family's attorney, Mr. Davies, the next morning. Ava, thank God, I've been trying to reach you. The lawyer said, I've been trying to contact you about some very alarming financial moves. Let me guess, I said, the words tasting like acid. My husband has been making inquiries about my trust fund. It's worse than that. He came to my office with forged power of attorney papers, claiming you were mentally incompetent. He said you'd had a breakdown and that your family had sent you away. The documents were very good fakes, but they wouldn't have stood up to a real challenge. He's trying to steal my trust fund, I said, the horrifying picture finally coming into focus. It appears so. And he wasn't alone. He brought a young woman he introduced as your concerned cousin, claiming she could attest to your fragile state. I answered automatically, I don't have a cousin. Then my blood ran cold. What was her name? Italian, I think. Isabella. An Italian last name. The familiar face. The strange resemblance that everyone had always mentioned. The timing of her arrival in Liam's life right before my trust fund was set to mature. Mr. Davies, I need you to do a deep background check on this woman. And I need you in this hospital room tomorrow. I think my husband is running an incredibly elaborate con, and I need to be ready for him. Sleep was a joke that night. My brain was on fire, piecing together the fragments of this nightmare. How did Liam know the exact date the trust matured? Why find a mistress who could pass for my relative? By sunrise, a nauseating theory had formed one so monstrous I could hardly stand it. I had Maria install a tiny hidden camera in my room, tucking it away behind a stack of books. Then, using Chloe's phone, which she tearfully left with me, I sent Liam a text. I know about the power of attorney. I'm lucid and I remember everything. You need to fix this before my lawyer calls the police. The reply was almost immediate. Don't do anything. We'll be there today. Delete this message. So, they were coming, and I was about to get some answers. I spent the morning getting ready, trying to conserve my strength. Maria helped prop me up in bed, arranging the pillows to make me look a little more pathetic than I felt. Dr. Evans gave me a quick lesson in managing my emotions. Remember, you have all the power in this situation, she told me firmly. His lies and his performance, they only work if you let them. Mr. Davies showed up just after noon, his briefcase filled with legal papers. He sat in a chair in the corner near the window, completely hidden from the doorway. The tiny camera Maria had set up was recording, focused squarely on the foot of my hospital bed. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Mr. Davies asked, his face etched with worry about my delicate condition. We can let the authorities handle this from here. I need to look him in the eye, I said. I need to know why. At exactly 2 o'clock, a soft knock came at the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, the monitor ratting me out, even as I kept my expression blank. Maria gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, then went to stand near the bathroom door. Liam walked in first, wearing a tailored suit I'd never seen. His hair was styled differently, and a new watch on his wrist was worth more than our first apartment. The transformation from ambitious developer to wealthy tycoon was startling. When his eyes landed on me, his expression wasn't relief, it was annoyance, quickly covered by a mask of deep concern. Ava, he said, laying it on thick. You're awake. We have been so worried sick. We, I asked, my voice surprisingly clear and strong. He shot a glance back toward the door, gesturing for someone to come in. A young woman appeared in the doorway, half hiding behind his arm. All I could see at first was a cascade of dark hair and a chic, expensive-looking dress. You remember Isabella, don't you? He asked, his voice smooth as silk. Your cousin! I didn't say a word, just watched him walk into the room, his confidence growing with each step. He was always an actor, brilliant in any part he chose to play. Today, he was the devoted husband. The doctors warned us the trauma might cause some memory loss, he continued. A lot has happened while you've been unwell. Like you telling everyone I had a breakdown? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He faltered for a second before the mask was back in place. Ava, that's a horrible misunderstanding. When you were first admitted, the prognosis was grim. I was out of my mind with grief. People are just twisting things. And the new penthouse, the yacht, the engagement announcement? His eyes narrowed, just for a second. You've been listening to gossip, sweetheart. That's not good for your recovery. The only thing that matters now is you getting better, and us securing our future. He pulled a folder from his jacket. The doctor said you shouldn't be dealing with stress. These just give me permission to manage our finances while you rest. I almost had to admire the performance. If my head wasn't throbbing, I might have bought his worried husband routine, but I saw the greed in his eyes, the way he pushed the pen at me. You mean the sale of my firm? The 20 million? I said, my voice sharp. He flinched a tiny crack in his perfect facade. You remember. Yes, wonderful news, but it's a huge burden. With your concussion, the stress of managing that capital could set your recovery back weeks. How incredibly considerate of you to worry so much. He smiled, reading my stillness as surrender. I have always taken care of you, Clara. Is that why you froze our joint accounts, changed the locks on the penthouse, and told my sister I was delirious? Julian's carefully polished mask started to chip. You're confused. That's the painkillers talking. Perhaps you should show her the wire transfer, Mr. Davenport said coolly, stepping away from the window. Julian spun around, completely blindsided. Who the hell are you? Arthur Davenport, Mrs. Thorne's counsel, and you must be the husband attempting to liquidate his wife's assets while she's incapacitated. Mr. Davenport laid a file on my tray table, showing emails between Julian and a young woman, plotting my accidental fall and their subsequent financial strategy. That's enough, Julian snarled, grabbing for the papers. Don't you dare touch that, my sister Isabel warned, moving between them. Hospital security is on its way. The young woman who'd been hovering near the door finally moved into the light, her curiosity winning out over her obvious fear. As she got closer, I saw her face clearly for the first time. The resemblance was a physical blow. She had my mother's jawline, a nose exactly like mine. Her entire posture was a ghostly echo of me at 19. But it was something deeper, a strange, primal sense of recognition. The woman, Chloe, just stared at me, her expression melting from nervousness to confusion to sheer, unadulterated shock. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're my mother. The world stopped. The room went absolutely silent. Julian lunged for her, grabbing her arm. Shut up, he hissed. Just stick to the plan. But Chloe seemed to be in a trance, looking at me as if she'd seen a ghost. With trembling fingers, she dug into her purse and pulled out a worn, creased photograph. I've been searching for you my whole life, she stammered, holding it out to me. It showed a teenage girl clutching a newborn. The girl's face was in shadow, but I knew it was me, a picture I hadn't laid eyes on in 18 years. As I stared at the proof of my deepest secret, the hospital room started to spin. The heart monitor shrieked as my past and present collided with a sickening crunch. My hands shook as I took the old photograph from her. The girl in the picture was so young, so utterly terrified, her eyes puffy from crying as she held the baby for the one and only time. Where did you get this? I breathed. It was in my baby blanket when I was adopted, Chloe said softly. The social worker said it was the only thing my birth mother left for me. I've carried it everywhere. Julian tried to interrupt. This is insane. She's a con artist, Clara. She's clearly preying on your condition. Be quiet, Julian, I said, with a force that seemed to come from someone else. For the first time in your life, just shut your mouth. I looked back at Chloe, truly seeing her. She had my father's hairline and my eyes. How could I have missed it? Because for 18 years, I had done everything in my power to forget. I was 17 I started, my voice quiet but firm, a high school senior with a full scholarship to study architecture. My boyfriend wanted no part of it, and my parents were terrified of the scandal it would cause in our town. Chloe sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes wide. They sent me to an aunt's house in another state. After you were born, they arranged a closed adoption. I was allowed to hold you once. Someone took this picture, but I never knew they gave a copy to you. My parents told me it was the only thing they received, Chloe said. They were amazing and always honest about my adoption. When I turned 18, they supported my decision to start searching. And how did you come to find Julian? Mr. Davenport asked, his lawyer's mind already connecting the dots. Chloe glanced at Julian, who stood rigid with silent fury. I didn't find him, she admitted quietly. He found me. He came into the coffee shop where I work 3 months ago. He said he knew who my biological mother was. The pieces slid into place with a horrifying click. The old drafting case, I said, staring at Julian. You found it when we moved into the penthouse last summer. He said nothing, but his glare was all the answer I needed. I had a dusty portfolio case with a few things from that time, the hospital bracelet, a hand-knit cap, and my copy of that photo. He told me you'd been looking for me, Chloe continued, that you were successful but lonely and wanted to find me, but you were worried I would hate you. And when did the wedding proposal fit into this story? I asked, my voice like ice. Chloe's face flushed with humiliation. It was a whirlwind. He was so kind, so supportive about connecting us. When he asked me to marry him 2 weeks ago, he said it would make you happy, seeing me settled with a man you already knew. It felt like a dream come true. And then I had my accident at the construction site. And suddenly, I became much more valuable dead than alive, I finished. Julian finally snapped. You can't prove a thing. This is a pathetic, made-up story to cut me out. Mr. Davenport cleared his throat. On the contrary, we have considerable proof, including the forged transfer requests and your emails. Not to mention a bigamy charge, since you're still legally married to my client. I don't get it, my sister Isabel cut in. Why do all this? Why not just stay married to Clara and enjoy the money with her? I looked at Julian, really saw him for the first time, and I finally understood. I was never love. I was a good investment, a patron for his failing startup. But $20 million required a bigger, bolder con. The family trust has an heir of the body clause, Mr. Davenport explained. Had Clara passed with no children, half the estate would go to architectural foundations. With a child, the full amount remains with the direct bloodline. I see, I said, the cold truth locking into place. And as Chloe's new husband, Julian would have full control of every last cent. Chloe scrambled back, away from Julian as if he were radioactive. You used me, everything you told me about us, about our future. Oh, grow up, Julian sneered. It was a business arrangement. You got your mommy reunion. I facilitated it. The money was simply a bonus. By trying to kill me and marrying my daughter? I shot back, disgusted. She would have inherited half eventually, once you two bonded, he argued, his narcissism on full display. You were just committing fraud and conspiracy to commit murder to accelerate the payout. Mr. Davenport corrected him. Julian's face was a mask of contempt. You can't prove any of it. You don't have to, I said softly. You just did. I turned to Chloe, whose entire life had just been detonated. I am so sorry. I am so sorry you got dragged into this. She swiped at her tears. I always dreamed of finding you, but not like this. Julian made a move for the door. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Davenport said evenly. Security is waiting in the hall, and the initial fraud and conspiracy charges have been filed. Fleeing would be unwise. Right on cue, 2 uniformed guards filled the doorway. Julian's eyes darted around the room, a cornered rat searching for an escape. Clara, he tried, one last time, with that smooth voice I used to love. We can work this out. Think about our history. Oh, I am, I said, my voice like steel. I'm thinking about it very, very clearly. Officers, he's the man you're here for. As they escorted Julian out, Chloe and I were left alone in the echoing silence. 18 years of questions hung in the air between us. I never, ever stopped thinking about you, I finally whispered. Not for one single day. The weeks that followed were a storm of legal motions, police statements, and tearful conversations. Mr. Davenport was incredible, unearthing a mountain of evidence that showed Julian had been planning this for over a year. He was meticulous, almost disturbingly so, Mr. Finch told me in my hospital room. He built a fake paper trail to imply you'd discuss the inheritance, even faking entire email chains between you. So how much trouble is he in? I asked. It wasn't about caring for him. I just needed to know the full extent of the damage. He's facing fraud, forgery, grand larceny, and bigamy. Conspiracy charges too if we can prove he delayed calling for help. He's going to be in prison for a very, very long time. The betrayal doesn't feel real. It's like watching a film about someone else's life. After 7 years of marriage, I have to admit I never knew the man sleeping next to me. So, his marriage to Maya? I had to ask. It's being annulled. Since your marriage to Leo was never legally ended, his union with Maya is completely invalid. Plus, with all the evidence of fraud, it's an open and shut case. Maya began visiting me every day after our first real conversation. Those initial talks were incredibly awkward, just full of tense silences and hesitant questions. How do you start to build a relationship with a daughter you gave up 17 years ago? Tell me about your parents, I finally asked her one afternoon. Your adoptive parents. Maya's entire face just seemed to soften. They are incredible. My dad teaches science at the high school and my mom is a librarian. They always made sure I felt completely loved. I'm so glad. That was all I ever wanted for you. They'd like to meet you whenever you feel ready, she added, her voice a little unsteady. They never said a bad word about you. Just that you were young and wanted me to have a life you couldn't give me. Tears started to burn in my eyes. They sound wonderful. So why didn't you ever try to find me? The question she'd been holding back for days finally escaped. I took a shaky breath. Shame, mostly. I thought a clean break would be better. And to be honest, I was terrified. Terrified of what? That you would hate me. That you'd have questions I couldn't answer. That seeing you happy with another family would just break me all over again. Maya slowly reached out and took my hand. I could never hate you. I have a million questions, yeah, but I get it. You were just a scared kid in an impossible situation. Her forgiveness, offered so easily, felt like it shattered a dam inside me. For the first time since the crash, I just cried, letting out 17 years of regret and what-ifs. Rachel, the nurse checking my vitals, quietly left the room to give us a moment. As my heart began mending, the long road of physical recovery was just beginning. The surgeons did amazing work on my leg, but I knew walking again would be a brutal fight. Those physical therapy sessions were exhausting, leaving me drained and frustrated. You are making incredible progress, Dr. Evans told me during a checkup. Many people with injuries like yours would still be completely bedridden. I have a very good reason to get back on my feet, I said, glancing at Maya, who now came to my therapy sessions just to cheer me on. My lawyer, Robert, visited with more updates on the inheritance. Given all that's happened, he said, we need to discuss how you want to manage the estate, especially since you now know about Maya. I had been thinking about absolutely nothing else. Uncle Samuel left me everything because he never knew Maya existed. If he'd known he had a great niece, he would have included her in his will. So you're saying you want to split the inheritance? Robert asked to clarify. Yes, 50-50. Right down the middle. Maya immediately began shaking her head. Dealin, no, that's your inheritance. I didn't search for you to get money. I know you didn't, I told her, my voice firm. But you're my family. And I have 17 years of birthdays that I need to make up for. 2 weeks after Leo's arrest, I had another visitor, Detective Miller, the lead investigator. We found something you should see when we searched your apartment, she said, placing a sealed evidence bag on my table. Inside was a prescription bottle. The label had my name, but the drug was something I'd never seen before. These are extremely strong sedatives for severe insomnia, Detective Miller explained, and according to the pharmacy's records, this prescription was filled 3 days before the car crash. I was speechless. I have never had trouble sleeping in my entire life. I'd never even seen that bottle before. We're investigating the possibilities that your husband was drugging you without your knowledge. A few neighbors mentioned hearing arguments before the accident. One said you seemed exhausted and disoriented the last time she saw you. The implication of her words turned my blood to ice. It was absolutely horrifying. Was Leo planning to kill me even before he found out about the inheritance? Did the accident just give him the perfect opportunity to finish the job? We may never truly know what was going on in his head, Detective Miller conceded. But I can promise you, we are building an incredibly strong case against him. As my hospital release date got closer, practical problems started stacking up. I couldn't go back to the apartment I'd shared with Leo for legal and emotional reasons, and a hotel just wasn't an option for someone needing this much care. You can stay with me, Maya offered. My apartment's small, but the building does have an elevator. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to be a burden on her. It is not a burden. I want you there, she insisted with a small, reassuring smile. Besides, we have a lot of lost time to make up for. Rachel, who'd become a good friend during my stay, had another suggestion. What about your uncle's estate? Robert had told me the place was just sitting empty. The idea began to take root. The country house where I'd spent a few happy childhood summers was mine now. It would need some adjustments to make it accessible for my recovery, but it was a fresh start, far away from the toxic memories of my life with Leo. But that's over an hour from the city, I said, thinking out loud. Maya, that would be an insane commute for you to get to the art gallery. She looked down, nervously fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Actually, I quit my job at the gallery last week. There were just too many bad memories of Leo and the way he used that place to manipulate me. So what will you do now? She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about going back to school. I always wanted to get a degree in psychology. Maybe I could help other adoptees and birth parents connect. It felt like fate. The timing was almost too perfect. The estate has plenty of room. You could stay there while you figure things out. Definitely. The hopeful way her face lit up was all the confirmation I needed. Out of the rubble of all that betrayal and pain, a new family was starting to grow, one built on truth, not lies. 6 weeks after the accident that destroyed my life, I was finally discharged. Leaving the hospital, which had become my sanctuary, was surprisingly difficult. I gave Rachel a huge hug and promised to send her updates on my recovery. You are one of the strongest women I have ever met, she said to me. Don't forget that when you're having a bad day. The drive to Uncle Samuel's estate, my new estate, was quiet. Maya focused on the winding country roads as I watched the city skyline fade into rolling green hills. A strange spring snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a clean, white blanket that truly felt like a new beginning. The house was even more stunning than the photos, a modern design with massive glass walls overlooking the water. My lawyer, Robert, had already arranged for modifications for my recovery, installing ramps, setting up a first-floor bedroom, and adding grab bars. So, what do you think? I asked Maya as we pulled into the long driveway. It's breathtaking, she whispered, her eyes wide. It looks like something out of an architecture magazine. Those first few weeks were a huge adjustment for both of us. We were mother and daughter, yes, but also strangers, learning each other's routines and finding our footing in this new life we were building together. I learned Maya was an early riser who loved to sing completely off-key while she showered. She learned that I'm basically a zombie until I've had my second cup of coffee. These were the small, mundane things that slowly started to weave our lives together. My physical recovery was slow and steady, with a therapist visiting the house 3 times a week. The sharp, shooting pains eventually faded into a manageable, dull ache. As my body healed, I graduated from a wheelchair to a walker, and then to crutches, celebrating every small milestone with cupcakes Maya brought from a local bakery. But healing my heart was a much bigger job. Dr. Evans and I continued our therapy sessions over video chat, working to unpack not just Leo's horrific betrayal, but the sudden reappearance of the daughter I gave away. She cautioned me that relationships born out of a crisis can feel intensely strong at first, but are often quite fragile. She urged me to give both myself and Maya the time and space to build something real that could actually last. Taking her advice, Maya and I started creating our own little traditions. We started having Sunday movie nights, trying new recipes on Thursdays, and taking short walks around the property as I slowly grew stronger. We talked about everything, and we talked about nothing, filling in the 17 years of silence between us. One night, about 3 months in, Sarah finally raised the topic we'd been dancing around. "I think you should meet my parents," she said softly. "My adoptive parents." A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach. "Do they hate me?" "No," she said, her voice steady. "They always spoke of you so gently. They knew you were trapped." We set a date for the following weekend. I spent days obsessing over what to wear, what I'd say, how to possibly thank the people who raised the child I couldn't. By the time the day arrived, I was a complete mess, just pacing with my cane. David and Susan Miller were exactly as Chloe described, warm, wonderful people who greeted me with open arms, not judgment. "We always knew we were just keeping her safe for you," Susan said, placing her hand over mine, "waiting for the day you could come back into her life." Their kindness was a tidal wave. They didn't see me as a threat for Chloe's love, they saw me as family. By the end of our visit, we were already planning Thanksgiving, creating this weird, wonderful, blended family of ours. But through it all, the criminal case against my husband Liam was a constant, dark cloud. I attended the required court dates, facing him across the room with a strength I never knew I possessed. The brilliant, charming real estate mogul I'd married had vanished, replaced by a shell of a man in an orange jumpsuit. When the judge sentenced him to 10 years for fraud, I felt no triumph, no happiness, just the quiet relief of a chapter finally closing. "Do you miss him?" Chloe asked me that evening. "No," I replied honestly. "I miss who I thought he was, but that man never really existed." As the seasons changed, so did we. We started a garden that spring, tending to new shoots in the soil. There was a quiet therapy in caring for those plants, like I was nurturing my own recovery. My friend Michael helped with the legal side, and we launched a foundation in my Uncle Arthur's name. It was dedicated to helping victims of financial scams and supporting single mothers. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt right using my catastrophe to do some good. Chloe started her psychology degree that fall at the city college, always trying to figure out what makes people tick. "You would have been an awful mogul's wife," she joked one night, looking out at the skyline. "You're too genuine, too grounded. And I still played the part for 10 years, I mused. "That's because you believed love meant shrinking yourself so his ego could be bigger." Her words hit me hard. "When did you get so wise?" "I had great teachers," she said softly. "All 3 of my parents." As my physical therapy sessions ended, I faced a blank slate. My old marketing job, a role I'd only taken to prop up Liam's ambitions, felt like another life. Now financially secure, I could reinvent myself. I started writing just to process things, but it soon grew into something more. My story, with all the names changed, was honest and raw, and it began taking the shape of a book. The writing was a form of therapy, a way to turn pain into purpose. A year to the day after the crash, we had a small get-together. My best friend Jess was there, along with Michael, Detective Harris, my physical therapist, and Chloe's parents, David and Susan. These were the people who had rebuilt my world, here to celebrate a new chapter. Looking at this incredible, cobbled-together family, I felt this overwhelming gratitude. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass, "to the detours that bring us right where we belong." Later, after everyone had gone home, Chloe and I were sitting on the porch when she finally asked the question hanging in the air. "Do you have any regrets?" She wasn't talking about the adoption. She meant the crash, finding out about Liam's betrayal, all the pain. I took a breath before answering. "Regret would mean wanting a different life," I told her. "And I wouldn't want any other life, not one that didn't have you." Money has a funny way of revealing a person's true colors, peeling back all the layers to show you what's really inside. Liam's betrayal taught me that lesson the hard way, but it also led me back to her. My daughter gave me a second chance at a love I thought was gone for good. It's strange how the most painful parts of our story can lead to the best endings. The crash that shattered my body was what ultimately healed my spirit. The husband who deceived me was the one who inadvertently brought me back to the daughter I had lost for 18 years. The money that put a target on my back is what gave me the freedom to start over. As sky grew dark, I knew real wealth wasn't in a bank account, it was the people sitting right here with me. I lost a husband, but I gained a daughter. I lost a marriage, but I found my own strength. I lost the life I had planned, and I built a new one that was infinitely better, and so much more true. "What's that smile for?" Chloe asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I looked at her and said, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find your way back home." Has a difficult time in your own life ever opened the door to something beautiful? I would love to read your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories of hope and resilience. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that an ending is often a new beginning. Thanks for watching, and never forget that sometimes our deepest scars are where our greatest strength is born.